Welcome to Horror TV. This is your host, Killenberg. For this episode, I'm reviewing episode 6 of Bates Motel, which is titled The Truth. Now, we start off with a recap of what has happened, which is how most episodes start of this. Alright, then we see Norma sitting down. Norman walks up to her to see if she's okay. She doesn't say anything. Emma asks if she should get her some water. Norman says he's never seen her like this before. Emma explains it must be hard to find out someone you like turned out to be a monster like that. Norma gets up. Emma asks where she was going. Norman follows her, but she starts running. She gets in her car. Norman tries to stop her. He tells her to stop the car. He ends up jumping in the passenger window. He grabs the wheel to try to stop her. He tells her this isn't the way to handle it. She finally stops and says she has to talk to him. Norman says she's not going to be able to just talk to him. She says she can't let him get away with it. He says he's not going to. Norman promises they'll get him. We see Dylan through the window of a truck. Gil asks, "What is it, Dylan?" He says he needs to talk to him. We see them talking. He explains what happened to Ethan. Gil asks if he would recognize this son of a bitch. Dylan says he's dead and said he ran him over. He explains what he did. Gil saw what he did as a good thing. He asks where Ethan's truck is at. Dylan says he has it. Gil tells him where to get rid of the truck. We see Dylan put gasoline on the truck and light it on fire. We see Dylan walk away and the truck explodes. We see the opening. We see this truck still on fire. Dylan watches the truck. We see a guy walk up behind him and say he admired his handiwork. He said Gil sent him to pick him up. Dylan asks if they'll be working together. The man says yeah and says his name's Remo. Dylan asks how long he's been working for Gil. Remo says 23 years. They talk some more. Remo asks how old he was and guesses 12. And no, I'm not joking. He actually guessed 12. Dylan says 21. Remo says 20 freaking 1. Unbelievable. Oh, and I'm not just censoring that. He actually says 20 freaking 1. Dylan says he's good at it. Remo says Dylan's not working for him. He's working for Dylan. We see Zhao in bed and we hear knocking. Norma comes in. She puts a plate of food on the table next to the bed. She looks at her wrists. She puts a blanket over her. Norma goes in the house and tells Norman and Emma that she couldn't wake her. Emma says she has to go to the police with them, whether she likes it or not. Emma explains no one would believe them without her. Norman suggests letting her recover. Emma suggests calling the FBI. Norma says they're not going to do that. Norma says she'll talk to her about going to the police. We see them walking by the motel. Norma asks Emma if she's okay to drive. She asks if she could call her mother. We find out that Emma hasn't heard from her mother in 8 years. She mentions being a kid with CF, and Norma and her hug. Norma tells her she's very brave. She said if she had a daughter, she would want her exactly like her. Emma explains she just wants to do the right thing. And she says she just wants Zhao to go to the police. Norma says she will and says tomorrow. She drives off. Norman tells her that was really good. Norma says there's no way in hell they're going to the police tomorrow. Or any day until they get that belt. Now at the house, Norman is telling her not to do this and says he's dangerous. We see her putting makeup on, and she says she has to. She talks about waiting until he's asleep and finding that. Norman suggests going with her. She says she's sorry she didn't believe him, and she says she loves him more than anything in the world. He asks if there's something wrong with him. She says no and said she just said that. She says they have to focus on getting the belt back. And Dylan says the one Shelby has? Norman explains everything to him. Norman says Emma wanted to go to the police. Dylan says if they turn him in, he'll turn Norma in. He asks where the boat is. And he asks Norman to take her to the boat. He tells Norma not to say anything until they get back. We see them in a car together. Dylan talks about the place he found. He says he's already got the keys. and he says no crazy people allowed. Norman asks about Norma. Dylan says he has to let her go. Dylan says she's just going to bring him down with her. Norman tells him to turn there. We see them walk to the boat. Norman asks where they look. Dylan says everywhere. They search the boat. Dylan asks what Norman thinks happened to his dad. Norman explains what he believes. Dylan says pretty freak accident. Dylan says he thinks Norma killed him. Norman says she wouldn't do that. Dylan says he can't see it because he's too close. Norman makes excuses for Norma and his dad. Dylan says he can't keep making excuses for people all the time. They find the belt. Dylan says, stick with me, kid. We see Norma sitting in a chair. We see the lights from a car in the window. She goes outside. It's Zach Shelby. He says he had to see her. She says it's a bad idea. He kisses her. She says her boys are going to be home soon. She can't be making out on the front porch. He suggests going to the motel. He says let's go, and they do. Dylan promises no one is going to see the belt again. He throws the belt into the ocean. He says now she's safe. Norman says thanks, and Dylan says my pleasure. Dylan says let's go home and pack up your stuff. We see Norma and Shelby in bed together. He asks what's wrong. She says nothing and says she's just worried about Norman. He says she deserves 10 minutes off of Norman duty. He hears something and asks what it is. He knows someone's there and goes looking. He knocks on room 11. We see Zhao taking a shower. Shelby says police, open up. Norman says she told one of the painters that he can stay over. Shelby asks her why she's lying to him. She says she's not lying, she just forgot. Zhao answers the door and sees Shelby. She runs away. He tries to shoot Zhao, but Norma stops him. Shelby knocks her down and calls her a bitch. Dylan drives up. He tells her they found the belt. He tells her about Norman leaving with him. She tells them what happened. Dylan says they need to go. Norma asks if what he said was true. Norman tries to avoid the question. Norma asks why he would do that. Dylan says they have to go. Norma refuses to get in the truck and asks Norman why. He asks if she killed his father. She says, no honey, I didn't. Shelby comes back and says that's not going to happen. He tells Dylan that he knows who he works for and tells him to get his gun out. He tells him to put it on the ground. He then tells them to step back and he tells them to go up to the house. We see them at the table and him standing there. He asks what they're going to do. He says he can't believe this is happening. Norma says no one's going to say anything. He tells her to shut up. He tells Norman this is all his fault. He puts the gun against Norman's head. She tells him to stop. And she tells him again that no one's going to say anything. Dylan agrees. He calls her a lying bitch and punches her. Norman gets quiet and starts watching them. Norman gets up and pins Shelby to the wall. Shelby drops the gun. Dylan grabs the gun. Shelby has another gun and they start shooting at each other. Norma tries to get Norman up. Shelby ends up shooting Dylan in the shoulder. They continue and Dylan shoots Shelby in the leg. He gets close to Shelby but the gun ran out of bullets. He runs upstairs and Shelby gets back up. Norma starts dragging Norman. Dylan ends up finding more bullets. Norma goes outside and calls 911. Norman wakes up and she tells him that they got to walk. They go to the car. He looks for her car keys but can't find them. We hear gunshots. Shelby walks outside. His face is now covered in blood. He points his gun but then passes out. And Dylan runs out. Norma hugs Dylan. We see Shelby's body on the steps. Dylan tells Norma her boyfriend is quite the prize. She tells him he needs to go to the hospital. Norma is just sitting in the car. Norma says he'll be fine. She says she called the cops. She asks, what am I going to tell them? Dylan says they're going to tell them the truth. He says he's done. Norma says he doesn't know the whole truth. She tells him what happened to Sam Bates. We find out Norma and him were fighting. Norman was pouring some milk in the kitchen, heard him saying mean things to her. They start to argue and Norman turns on the blender. Sam hits Norma. Norman dumps his drink out. Sam grabs Norma by the hair. Norman hits him in the head with the pitcher. She tells Norman to look at her, and he just stood there. She tells him to come with her. She takes him to his room and tells him to lie down. We see that she made it look like an accident. Then we see the scene from episode 1. Norma says he thinks Sam's death was an accident. Dylan asks what's wrong with him. She says she doesn't know. She explains he didn't know what he was doing, and so he needs protected. She says, so you can either get out of my way or you can help me. We see the police car drive up. We see the camera zoom in on Norman and the episode ends. So yeah, it was a pretty good episode. And here's what's interesting. This isn't even the end of season 1. Yeah, there's actually 4 more episodes to go for season 1. And I really like this episode. Like I said before, if you have not seen this show yet, I would heavily recommend it. Alright, so that was the end of episode 7 of Horror TV. Join me again next time as I review episode 7 of Bates Motel.